And we're live. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Mason. Mason, you recently participated in Warzone Atlanta, and very famously, you brought the Battle Snails list, the
I did.
FT17 spam. How was the weekend?
The weekend was all right. I unfortunately got sick at the tail end of things, but other than that, it was
Oh,
pretty fun.
yep. And how did you do personally in the tournament? I know you didn't win because well, I already interviewed the winner, so.
Yeah, I did not do super well. Um, some of it was dice, some of it was other things.
Okay.
In your interview with John, he mentioned like I was just getting slammed on dice.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because what we're going to talk about today is the Battle Snails list. It's one of those lists that I actually considered running in my spam, and spam like little recurring theme, and I still may do that at some point because it's one of those lists that a lot of people are talking about. This is overpowered, but at the same time, you took not the spammiest version of it. You could have done worse, I think, but at least you had a lot of FT17s.
Yeah, I had 10 FT-17s, 6 mounted with the light anti-tank gun,
Yeah,
and 4 with the machine gun.
yeah. So 10 tanks, ladies and gentlemen, 10 tanks, and you can still lose games with that. So maybe it's not as overpowered as some people may think it is. Anyway, I will share screen in a second, and we can watch some beautiful images of your army. Um, and I think you should also like talk us through what was in your list while I do that.
All right, give me a moment to see if I can pull up my list here. There it is. So the initial list, I brought 20 order dice. Um, it had 3 inexperienced platoon commanders, just paying the tax there.
Yeah.
Something that some people disagree with, but they were probably one of the strongest units I had on the table, were my infantry squads, which were 8-man regulars, double LMG for all of them. A
Okay.
bit pricey, but that double LMG I think is the way to go on infantry personally.
Mm.
Even without the Hitler's buzzsaw rule, you can tear things apart at range. And especially a list like this, which is almost always long range,
Yeah.
you you want the LMGs.
Yeah, you
A
do.
single forward observer, the aforementioned 10 FT-17 tanks, and then I had an artillery platoon with a dual-mounted light autocannon and a Lashley truck with double pintle mounts.
So basically, another tank. That truck there is actually kind of good because it's got the two machine guns.
It was an experience and it didn't hit a whole lot, but it was
Yeah.
mainly there as a source of anti-air.
Mm. Yeah.
And then I didn't go against a single forward observer, so it just sat wherever it could, shooting at things until someone finally got annoyed and blew it up.
How many order dice were you at?
20.
20 order dice, which is not too high, I would estimate. It's kind of okay. For
The orig
1250, getting 10 tanks into a list is really cool, isn't it?
so the original version of this list was 27 order dice.
Yeah?
Then I trimmed it down and added all of the anti-tank guns.
Mm.
That's what brought it down to 20. Initially, I had brought 2 medium artillery anti-tank guns,
Yep.
and after a few scrim games, I decided that stationary anti-tank was not the way to go.
Mm. So, back when you were building this list, I have a couple of questions about that. One is, how did you come up with this?
Uh, the concept of the list, or
Yeah, the
just
concept of the list. Yeah.
so all the way back when I first started playing Bolt Action and in version 2,
Mm.
I was just looking at units and I saw the FT-17 because I always enjoyed playing kind of the weird off nations, minor nations. So I have like a Belgian army.
Mm.
Um, Hungarians seem to be pretty strong currently, so I wouldn't call them an off nation anymore.
No, they're not.
But Hungarians,
Yeah.
so on and so forth. And looking at all the French tanks, the FT-17 is pretty standout in the roster for its unique trait and the cost of it.
Hmm.
And then that kind of became, how many of these can I put into a single army?
Yeah. And then did you test it out? Was there a reason why you suddenly decided, well, I'm gonna need some anti-tank guns?
So in the test games I had, a lot of people kind of just no-feared their tanks directly into mine.
Yeah.
And the problem was I had so many that it was so hard to kill them all.
Yeah.
And so I would have a Stug or a Panzer III like 12, 18 inches away from my tanks. And I'd have like 4 or 5 right there where I could easily get onto the flank of it. But I'm armed with machine guns. So why not swap to an anti-tank gun and actually kill the tank?
Yeah.
Plus, the other reason was when I was using the stationary anti-tank gun, I found that it was very easy for it to get its shot blocked by the horde of FT-17s.
Yeah.
And because it's so hard to move it, you would just be like, okay, cool, you're not going to shoot for 3, 4 turns because you have an FT-17 in front of you who's going to
Yeah.
take an hour to move out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think with a list like this, you can't really have stationary guns combined with that much. And I know it's not mobility, but the tanks should be moving a little bit at some point, right? And they should push up a little bit because that's what enables your infantry to go and grab objectives, right? And that'll sit them right in the path of everything that they don't want to be in the way of all your shots if you have stationary guns. I completely agree. So you changed it up. What did you actually pull out of the original list in order to buy all these anti-tank guns?
I had originally pulled out the 2 artillery pieces. I think I had artillery track. I might have had an artillery track. No, I don't think. Never mind. I did not have any artillery tractors for them. I pulled out 2 anti-tank rifles, like 4 light mortars. Might have been 1 anti-tank rifle and 4 light mortars. But basically, any support weapon got pulled out, and then I added in the artillery observer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here we can see your lovely battle snails, by the way. Yeah. Did you paint them yourselves?
Yes, yes. Everything in my army I hand painted.
Not everyone does that, but I can definitely respect. This takes a lot of work. All the camo on that many FT-17s.
Yeah, and I decided to do different like platoon style, so they have different platoon markings. Then each platoon has like a different camo pattern.
Brilliant. So you can also actually tell which platoon they're from if you ever need to do that.
Yep.
Yep. Right. So you build a list. You went to Warzone. I guess by now you sort of know how this performs and how it doesn't perform. So let's talk about what's good about this list. What do you think are its strengths? What can it do really well?
It's very good at dishing out pins, especially to single targets.
Yeah.
That's probably its biggest strength. There's also a bit of a mental factor to it because your enemy's going to see you put down 10 tanks and be like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Especially if they didn't particularly bring a ton of anti-tank themselves.
Yep. Did you actually outpin units during the weekend?
I don't think I killed a single unit from pins.
Okay.
It's just so hard to kill a unit from pins.
Yeah, it is.
But it forced a lot of people to go down, either rally, and at the end of the day, I think that was kind of what I started going for. I was like, okay, I'm not going to pin anybody out. I'm going to make you not be able to use this unit. And that's kind of their biggest strength, is they can pick a unit on the table and say, you cannot play the game anymore.
Yeah. Because you can pin them with 4 or 5 pins and then you're just out. What about the anti-tank guns on the FT-17s? Did you actually enjoy having those? Or were they good, or was it a waste of points?
It's kind of hard to say. In the games where they hit, they tended to do pretty well. I had a few instances where I killed like 7, 8+ tanks from the other side of the board, which was... The kill on the 8+ tank was a side shot, which is why I got that. But because the penetration on it's the same as a heavy autocannon.
Yep.
So 3 plus 24 inches, 2 plus 48.
Mm.
And a lot of the tanks people were bringing to Warzone were also 7 plus. So you
Yes.
had like the Panzer ones, you
Yeah.
had the British list that
Mm.
had all those other tanks in it. Um, the anti-tank guns should have done at least relatively well against those. The only tank that gave me trouble was the 9 plus
Mm.
Stugs.
Yeah.
I only went up against one of those, but it just had a field day.
Okay. So, do you feel like your AA gun did that also perform, or was it not beneficial for how you actually ran the list?
Um, I had one game where it did really well.
Mm.
That was my first game, and I got it very close to the center objective and just set it on ambush, and
Yeah.
the squad of Gurkhas couldn't really charge through it. And it took them a lot of resources to. That's the first table right there that I played on.
Yeah.
Um, it took him a lot of resources to pin it down and maneuver around it. But in almost every other instance, it seemed like one of the high priority targets that everybody was just like, I want to kill that thing now.
I wonder why. Yeah. Okay.
Or autocannon shots.
Yeah. True. Which is brutal if you want to drive in front of it, but I mean, you could just not do that, right? Um.
Yeah, so I think it was much more of a deterrent than an
Mm.
actual physical force.
Yeah.
But
And what about the infantry? You actually took an artillery observer, double shot artillery French observer, which is, brutal in itself, and then all those LMGs. How did that all perform? Do you feel like the infantry was just an afterthought, or did they actually
uh,
work really
the
well?
infantry worked very well.
Yeah.
My double LMG squads were actually more deadly than my tanks.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the tanks can pin everything down. The infantry can then push in, pick a target, and
Mm.
either throw 12 shots at close range or 8 shots at long range. The artillery observer, I did not have a lot of luck in.
Okay.
Uh, I had one game where he missed 4 times in a row.
Yo.
Um, a lot of other games, I'm not used to using forward observers, so I think I positioned him somewhat poorly.
Mm.
There were quite a few games where he just got knocked off the table turn one, turn
Yeah.
two.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think his barrage only came in like 3 or 4 times.
Mm. Right. So that we've talked about the strengths here. Basically, you're overloading your opponent with armored targets, and then the infantry is actually strong enough for you to survive and dish out damage as well. And you're really good at dishing out pins. All of that I get. What about the weaknesses? What does this army not do well?
Um, well, one of the main weakness of it is the table itself, the board and the terrain.
Yeah.
A thought people don't really think about is when you have this many tanks, lines of sight become a huge chore to be able to
Mm.
get them to shoot past one another, to be able to shoot past friendlies to shoot past them. And you can see in this table here, we have a little narrow spot between buildings.
Yeah.
I can only fit 2, maybe 3 tanks to be able to shoot through that. And in order to shoot at the same target, they all have to be close together.
Mm-hmm.
So it very quickly becomes a positioning nightmare.
Yeah.
And if the enemy has an MRL,
Oh.
I'm very thankful I did not have to go against one of the MRL lists.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Because at least I mean, one thing, you have quite a lot of units. And second thing, most of them need to be fairly close together to support each other, right?
yes, they have to
Yeah,
be very close together.
yeah.
The command tank is very important to keep around them because as long as they have the command tank near them, they only fail their one-man turret roll on a foobar,
Mm,
which is one reason why taking them as a veteran is so important.
yeah.
And for 6 extra points, why wouldn't you?
It's pretty cheap. It's very cheap actually.
30 versus 36, I'll pay
Yeah,
60 points to make my entire force
yeah.
veteran.
Okay. So
Um,
so one of the weaknesses is actually gaining line of sight and getting good positioning. What else
yeah,
can you tell us about this?
Long range, this is
Mm,
something I didn't even think about when I made the list, is almost all of your tank engagements are going to be beyond 24 inches
yeah.
because of the slow rule or the pitifully slow rule.
Mm,
And you're going to want to kind of be stationary for a lot of your tank engagements so you can get that +1 to the anti-tank roll. And plus, it's not exactly beneficial to drive out into the middle of an open field with the tank shooting at you. You'd rather
no,
stay in the cover terrain.
that's typically suicide. Yeah.
So I quickly found that on a lot of, as soon as like a source of any tank pushed up, half
Mm,
my army would be stopped in one spot or another, trying to whittle it down. And sometimes I whittled it down. Sometimes it would take 4 turns and 10 tanks shooting at it for it to finally die.
yeah.
Um,
Did you like wolf pack against enemy tanks so you had multiple of your vehicles going against it?
I always had multiple vehicles together.
Mm,
I didn't have a chance for a ton of scrimmage games, and this is my adjustments for Warzone were the first time I brought the anti-tank versions.
yeah.
So I was still kind of trying to figure out how that went from there.
Mm,
I found personally the best way to do it is to kind of have small teams of them, so 3 to 4 tanks per team,
yeah.
like two anti-tank tanks, and then like one machine gun tank.
Mm,
That seemed to work the best because then you'd be able to threaten tanks or infantry pretty easily with that,
yeah.
and then you'd be able to spread out a little bit more and not be completely grouped up.
Mm. I also have to ask, pitifully slow. I mean, um, oh, that must suck. Did you guys play any breakthrough games where you like had to get up the board or and how do you deal with that?
I did have. We had one that was past the ball, where you had to get your
Yeah,
infantry squads with a ball all the way up. Um, to deal with those kinds of objectives, if you can outflank, some allow outflanking, some don't.
yeah.
You need to outflank with at least 3 tanks.
Okay.
At the very least, have one of your little tank teams outflanking. That pushes them 24 inches up the board on turn 3, which
Mm,
is faster than they can move on the table, or even
yep.
further if you're allowed.
Yeah.
And that also helps you get a lot of positioning for side shots or maybe clearing terrain that your other tanks just couldn't get around.
Yeah, and especially because you only have 3+, right? Those side shots are crucial if you want to ever be able to kill enemy tanks at range.
Yep. And if it's like in development where you can't outflank and you have to fully cross the board,
Mm,
uh, I think the best thing I figured out was just stick all my small guys in the transport and cross your fingers it doesn't die.
yeah.
Obviously position it a bit more smartly than that, but you'd have to just walk and run your infantry up, and your tanks, there's no way they're going to make it. They have to play defensive.
Mm. And they are pretty good at playing defensive. I mean, they're machine gun nests, most of them, right? And then you have anti-tank nests. So basically they are pretty good at defensive play, but
I would say they have a
offensive,
lot
yeah.
more in common with a gun line than they do a tank list.
Yes, right. They're basically an armored gun line. Is that it?
That's how I would describe it, yes.
Yeah.
It's an armored gun line. They have a little bit more mobility than a gun line, obviously, but
Not a lot.
not a lot. They can
Yeah.
move and shoot. That's the
Yeah.
thing they can do over a gun line.
Yeah. But I mean, the one thing that you could add to this that would make it even better is if they had some sort of access to HE in any of its forms, right? But they don't. So yeah.
I would kill for a light howitzer over the anti-tank gun. I'll still
Yes.
take the 1 inch high explosive,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think I had one person go in a building against me.
Mm.
They did not
Yeah.
last long in that building.
No, they typically don't.
Um, but another weakness of the tank list, I would say, is what I like to affectionately call rolling sixes.
Yeah.
So artillery observers. So this list is surprisingly resilient against pins.
Mm?
So I absolutely just no feared into artillery observer barrages,
Ah.
and it worked surprisingly well
Yeah.
until I had one dude who rolled 4 6s, and
And
because
killed
my
all your
tanks were
tanks.
close, 4 6s on the artillery barrage, and then because my tanks were close enough,
Yeah.
the HE template overlapped 2 or 3
Oh.
tanks,
Oh
and
no.
doing that 4 times in a row, that list was gone. Like I lost 6 tanks to artillery barrage.
Oh.
One
Oh.
of
Oh.
them
Oh. Oh. Oh.
foobarred the next turn and ran off the table.
Yeah. Yeah, these tanks really can't stand up to actually being hit by an artillery barrage. Last weekend, I played against a French list that it was more or less an ordered ice spam. It had 32, but it had a lot of FT-17s as well, and I think I killed 3 of them with an artillery barrage as well. Yeah, they die so easily to that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so if that barrage hits them, they're done for, and they can't run from it. That's the other
yeah,
part. They're
yeah,
all grouped up. They can't run. It is the perfect multiple rocket launcher or artillery barrage target.
yeah,
Light mortars, you don't really have to worry about as much because they can only glance your top armor.
yeah,
But anything heavier than that, indirectly, it's gonna hurt.
yeah. Right. So here at the end, I'm going to have to because there's going to be other people who try to do this. You know it's going to happen, right? I already know that the juggernauts in the UK are at least thinking of, and I think they have actually built this list as well. So they're running battle snails as well. Other people are going to try out their luck with this madness that you've run here. What was your standard operating procedure when you got to the table and you start your first turn? Is there something that has to go first and then second? How do you decide what to do in your gameplay here?
Well, one of the big things I found was I'm used to version 2 where it's you deploy your tanks last.
Yeah,
When you have so many tanks as when you half your army list is tanks, you
you
really don't
can't.
have the luxury of deploying your tanks last. So it was the matter of finding out where on the board is a good position to sit.
Mm,
Hope you get that deployment. Um, if you can't get that, and if you can't choose your side, then it can be pretty difficult right off the bat. Um, and deploy your tanks together in teams, and you have to keep them together in teams. It's as
yeah.
soon as one goes off on its own, it's either not doing enough damage or it's getting jumped by every single anti-tank source on the map.
Mm. So you
The
would actually often deploy your tanks maybe even before your infantry?
A few times I did in fact deploy tanks before my infantry, um, because that kind of dictated where my push was coming from.
Yeah.
And you can't really fake out your opponent and be like, oh, I'm deploying over here to push over here. Surprise, it's the other side of the table. Because once they see 3 or 4 tanks go down,
Yeah, of
then they
course.
kind of know.
Yeah.
And the infantry definitely, they need to be pushing up, and you can have 1 or 2 in the back line, but they need to be harassing as much as possible.
Yeah.
Those 12 shots were nothing to sneeze at. I did super well with uh, them. They were great.
Mm. Um, in the individual turns, did you quite often snap to your tanks, or were they just
They
running
snap to
individually?
every single turn.
Yeah.
Because if you have a command tank snapping to, all of a sudden your low velocity anti-tank gun's basically acting as a autocannon.
Mm.
Or you can be snapping to a machine gun tank, or you can have an officer. I also positioned an officer with my tanks as well, so one of the infantry guys.
Yeah.
So I could have one group with the command tank, one group with the command tank, one with an officer,
Mm.
and they all had their morale bonuses, and then you could snap to.
Yeah.
Snapping to is very important in this list. You need the massed firepower. One is just not enough.
Yeah. Also, because if you snap to a group at the same time, you can put 3 pins on a target, right? That target is then out of the game. Even if you don't kill it, it's definitely down, out, can't do a thing, right? So I think snap toing, especially with high order dice lists, especially with this sort of tank spam, you need that snap to. Did you find that you would have wanted there to maybe be a company commander close
I did
by?
find that, and
Yeah.
especially once I went against a company commander, I kind of
Yeah.
stopped and took a look at my list, and I'm like, maybe I should have, because as much as I hate to say it, I might drop the artillery observer for a company commander just because my artillery observer did
Wow.
nothing. I know
Okay.
it's a shame. I need the artillery observer, but at the same time, I'm not great with observers personally.
Mm,
I get them killed very easily.
mm.
Um, but yeah, other modifications I'd make to the list. I found, at least on my opponent's side, just having like two tanks with light anti-tank guns was kind of enough to keep me back.
Yeah.
So next time I try this list, I'm thinking of just removing all the FT-17 anti-tank guns and instead bringing, because for literally, I think it's cheaper by like 2 points.
Yeah.
You can bring two AMC 35s, I believe is the tank. And
Yeah.
those don't have one-man turret, they don't have slow, and they have
Mm.
light anti-tank guns. They're 125 points. Where is
Yeah.
that? Yeah,
Or you could, go to the Char B, get one of those with howitzer or whatever. I mean, you could mix up the composition of the tanks. Although, I guess in order for this to be a real battle snails list, you would still have to have quite a lot of them be FT-17s, right?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be where a lot of the fine tuning for this kind of list is going to be. It's going to be in what percentage of tanks is anti-tank, what percentage is machine
Yeah.
guns.
Yeah.
Do you bring any tanks besides FT-17s? If you do, are you going full on Char 2C heavy
Mm.
tank, or are you going down to the just like a? Because I was also looking at the Portees,
Mm.
which I kind of very quickly was like, nah, I'm not going to take that because it's a soft skin, 65
It's
points
very
with the
vulnerable, but
anti-tank
yeah.
gun. Um, I think
But
the AMC
I mean,
35 is the best
the
choice.
Portees might be a piece that you would want to go later in the turn anyway, so that your battle snails would move first, and then the Portees right at the end of the game would maybe go up and take a few shots. Um, but yeah.
But yeah, I
Anywho, that more or less was the interview. Thank you, Mason, for coming on and telling us about how you ran the battle snails. Do you feel comfortable actually giving us your placement in the tournament here at the end?
I don't know. I didn't fully pay attention towards the end. I got sick.
Yeah.
By the end of it, I'm like, I need to get on a plane and go home, and I feel miserable. Please.
Yeah, but
Um,
if I remember correctly, you did end up in the bottom half, right?
I was definitely in the bottom half. I think, I had one draw, one win, and three losses.
Yeah.
And my draw game was it was a win until they rolled double ones on a Gurkha with like 7 pins on it and took
Ow.
objective.
Well, that'll happen.
Happens.
And I'm guessing if you were being killed by Gurkhas, then you were playing against Randy, who was very competitive and good.
No, I was playing against Steve Kelly.
Okay. I didn't know that Steve had Gurkhas as well. Anywho, right. Mason, I will potentially see you at the WTC, and
You will.
let's hope that you get more training with the battle snails before then.
Yes, I don't know if I'll bring him to WTC since you can't bring more than two of the same unit.
That's a problem. I agree. Right.
I was going to, but
Yeah.
now I have to find some other horrifying shenanigans to pull.
Well, look at the Hungarians and take it from there, I think.
Got it.
Anyhow, thank you so much for letting us know how to play Battle Snails, and I will talk to you then. Cheers.